I never thought that the most painful blow of my life wouldn't come from life itself, but from the hand of a woman to whom I opened the doors of my home. Her palm brushed my cheek with such force that I felt the sound echo off the walls of the courtroom. A murmur ran through the room. No one knew what to say. I stood immobile, my dignity suspended between the air and my shock. Pamela, my daughter-in-law, in her tight suit and her arrogant gaze, was breathing furiously. "You disgusting old woman," she screamed, "and you are the disgrace of this family." My son, Robert, was standing next to her. He said nothing. He only lowered his head and adjusted the sleeves of his jacket, as if it didn't concern him. In that moment, I understood something. Silence can also be a slap. I had been called for a family conciliation hearing. I didn't know that my own son would be the one asking the judge to declare me mentally incompetent to manage my assets. Pamela had convinced him that I was no longer in my right mind, that my grief over the death of Jonathan, my husband, his father, had left me unbalanced. And there they stood, in front of me, with that mix of feigned pity and genuine greed. "Mrs. Jenkins," their lawyer said, "we understand you wish to maintain your independence, but you must understand that at your age, financial errors are dangerous. Your son only wants to protect you." Protect me. That word made me nauseous. Someone who wants to protect you doesn't steal your heart or try to leave you homeless. The judge called for silence. Pamela looked at me with a poisoned smile. That smile was more violent than the slap. But before we continue, I want to extend a very special invitation. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. And comment below to let us know which city you are watching us from. Now, let's continue. The hearing proceeded. Their lawyer spoke of asset security, legal guarantees, financial custody. I only thought of Jonathan. He always used to say, "Ines, money doesn't change people, it only reveals them." And now I understood how right he was. Robert was my only son. I raised him alone for years, while Jonathan built the family business. I used to sell sandwiches and coffee outside a school. I cooked at night, and even so I found time to be there for every fever, every cry, every exam. All of that seemed to have been erased. The woman he chose as his wife couldn't stand to see me nearby. Pamela never called me Mum, or even mother-in-law. She called me Mrs. Jenkins, with that cutting coldness of someone who wants to mark their territory. The judge called a 10-minute recess. I went out into the hall with my soul burning. Pamela followed me, and that's when it happened. She approached me with that hyena's smile I had learned to recognize. "You know what, Mrs. Jenkins?" she said in a low voice. "You should thank me. When we finish here, your life will stop being a burden to us." "A burden," I replied. "I gave my son everything I have, and I welcomed you like a daughter." "Yes," she laughed with contempt, "but your son is no longer a child, and you don't understand that you are in the way." I tried to step away, but then she raised her hand and slapped me. The sound was dry, precise, like the shot of an invisible gun. Everyone turned around. My son came running, and instead of defending me, he took her hand. "Pamela, stop," he murmured. "Don't do this here." He didn't yell at her. He didn't hug me. He didn't look at me. He only restrained her with the delicacy of someone protecting a fragile jewel. I felt like I was dying. I sat on the bench in the hall, holding my still hot cheek. A woman from the audience approached with a tissue. "Don't worry, ma'am," she told me. "What goes around comes around." I smiled bitterly. I no longer believed in miracles. However, something inside me ignited at that instant. A spark. An internal voice that told me, Don't rise as a victim, rise as a judge. And without knowing why, I knew that destiny had brought me there for a reason much bigger than a simple family lawsuit. I returned to the room with slow but firm steps. Pamela threw me a triumphant look. Robert didn't even lift his eyes. The judge adjusted his glasses and announced, "We are going to continue with the hearing." I took a deep breath. And then, the court clerk entered with an envelope in her hand. "Excuse me, Your Honor," she said. "An urgent document has just arrived from the Supreme Judicial Council." The judge took it, read it, and looked at me with surprise. Then he stood up. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said with respect, "I ask you to join us for a moment in the adjoining room." Pamela frowned. "Why?" she asked, uneasy. "Because apparently Mrs. Jenkins has another capacity here that we were not informed of." I didn't entirely understand what was happening, but I maintained my silence. Sometimes, the power of silence is worth more than 1,000 screams. The room fell into murmurs. Pamela began to get impatient. "This is absurd," she was saying. "That woman is a senile old lady. She can't have any capacity." The judge looked at her severely. "Silence, ma'am," and returned to me with a different smile. "Mrs. Jenkins, the council informs us that you have been designated as an honorary alternate member of the family court due to your trajectory as a retired judicial assistant." The silence became absolute. Pamela opened her mouth, but no words came out. My son lifted his gaze. His face lost its color. And then, while everyone was still paralyzed, the judge said something I will never forget. "From this moment on, this hearing comes under your review and signature, Mrs. Inez Jenkins." I slowly sat down in the judge's chair, the very seat before which I had been humiliated minutes earlier. I looked at my son, and I knew that, for the first time in a long time, he understood the weight of a mother's silence. I said nothing. I only rested my hands on the table and let the echo of the past speak for me. When everything calmed down in the courtroom and the murmur dissolved into respect, I looked at my son and remembered the day it all began. It wasn't in a courtroom, but in the cemetery. Under the shadow of a cypress tree, with the warm air and wet eyes, I said goodbye to the man who was my partner for 40 years, Jonathan Jenkins. He was my balance, my guide, the father Robert needed, and the only one who could coax a smile out of me, even in the middle of a storm. He died without noise, without complaints, holding my hand and telling me what would be his last words. "Inez, trust only what you can look in the eyes." At the time, I didn't understand the scope of that sentence. Years later, that warning would become my shield. After the funeral, the notary summoned us for the reading of the will. Present were Robert, his wife Pamela, and I. The office smelled of old leather and ink. The notary slowly opened the folder, aware that every word he uttered would have the power to change lives. "Mr. Jonathan Jenkins leaves to his wife, Mrs. Inez Jenkins, all his assets, properties, and shares as universal heir, with the obligation to manage the family estate until his son, Robert Jenkins, demonstrates maturity and moral solvency." Pamela shifted in her chair. I lowered my gaze, surprised. The notary continued. "Likewise, the testator provides an additional reserved clause, which will be revealed only if any judicial process is initiated against Mrs. Jenkins." The silence was absolute. That clause, seemingly insignificant, would be the spark that ignited the family war. Pamela was the first to break the silence. "Universal heir? What do you mean?" she said with a restrained laugh. "Jonathan couldn't have wanted that." The notary looked at her over his glasses. "Ma'am, this document is signed and notarized by him personally. Everything was reviewed while he was alive. She pursed her lips. Robert, however, merely observed the folder with an impenetrable expression. In that moment, I knew. My son was divided. One part of him was still the boy who held my hand crossing the street, and the other was already the man who shared a bed with a woman capable of manipulating him with a single look. When we left the office, Pamela walked a few steps ahead and said, in a low but sharp voice, "Don't worry, Mrs. Jenkins. You'll be able to enjoy your inheritance for a little while." I didn't imagine she would fulfill her threat so soon. The following weeks were a parade of false pleasantries. Pamela came to the house with apple pies and smiles. "I want us to have lunch together," she'd say. "We have to keep the family united." I accepted, because I hadn't yet learned to see the poison behind the manners. One afternoon, as we were preparing iced tea, she let her mask drop. "Tell me, aren't you afraid of managing so much money at your age?" "Money never scared me," I replied. "I'm afraid of the people who covet it." She smiled, ice cold. What a good line. You should write that on your epitaph. I knew then that the war had begun. Robert changed over time. He no longer called me Mom, but Ines. He stopped visiting on Sundays, and when he did, he came accompanied by his wife and his disdain. He started talking to me as if I were a burden. "You should rest, Mum. You're old. You can't handle the numbers." "I'm not tired, son," I replied one afternoon. "I'm just learning to look better." Jonathan always said that greed has the voice of reason, and now I heard it coming from my own son's mouth. One night, while I was sleeping, the phone rang. It was the family lawyer. "Mrs. Jenkins, your son has requested a judicial review of the will. He says you are not in the mental condition to manage the assets." My blood ran cold. "My own son?" I whispered. "That's right. The hearing is in 2 weeks." I hung up the phone, unable to breathe. Betrayal has a sound. The sound of the line being cut after hearing the unthinkable. The following days were a whirlwind of sadness and contained rage. I didn't sleep. I paced the house from one side to the other, touching Jonathan's things, talking to him as if he could hear me. "Why, Jonathan?" I asked aloud. "Why did you leave me alone with this?" One afternoon, while cleaning his desk, I found a key. It was small, brass, and had a tag with a number. MAB 17. I didn't know what it belonged to, but I put it away. Deep down in my soul, something told me that key would be important. On the day of the hearing, I put on my best suit. I didn't do it out of vanity, but out of dignity. Looking at myself in the mirror and seeing a woman who was whole was my way of preparing for battle. When I arrived at the courthouse, Pamela looked me up and down. "Ready to lose everything?" she said to me. "No, dear. Ready for you to find out that you never had it." Their lawyer spoke for almost 30 minutes, presenting false medical reports, invented quotes, and even manipulated testimony from a nurse who said I confused my neighbors' names. Every word was a stab. But I remained silent, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew that the truth doesn't need to defend itself, only to wait its turn. When the judge announced a recess, I was left alone in the room. My hands were trembling. I took the key out of my pocket and looked at it again. MAB 17. The number seemed familiar. Then I remembered. Drawer 17 of Jonathan's old office filing cabinet. I had promised never to open it, but promises lose value when betrayal is disguised as justice. I decided that when I left that hearing, I would go straight there. And if my husband had left me a secret, it was time to know it. As I got up to go to the hall, a court official approached me. "Mrs. Jenkins," she said, "the Judicial Council sent an urgent document in your name. I took it, confused. The envelope had the official seal and a phrase in blue ink: to be opened only if dignity is called into question. I put it away without opening it. It wasn't the moment yet. I left the building with the certainty that whatever happened, my story wouldn't end in that courtroom, and that Pamela, with all her arrogance, still had no idea who the woman she had dared to humiliate really was. They say a mother's love has no limits, but they don't tell you that when that love is betrayed, the wound doesn't bleed on the outside. It bleeds on the inside, slowly until it rots your soul. After that hearing, I understood that my son no longer belonged to me. Pamela had turned him into her mirror. The same tone of voice, the same arrogance, the same inability to look in the eyes when lying. For days I tried to convince myself that it was all a misunderstanding, that Robert would react, that he would apologize. But he didn't. On the contrary. One afternoon he came to see me. He walked in without knocking, with the arrogant air of someone who feels they own everything. "Mum," he said without emotion, "I've talked to the lawyer. This doesn't have to be a war. If you transfer the company shares to my name, everything can be resolved peacefully." "Peacefully, I replied, looking him straight in the eye. "You call stealing from your living mother peace? It's not stealing, it's order. Order is not imposed with threats, Robert. You don't understand the current world, Mum. You're trapped in the past." "And you?" I asked him. "What are you trapped in?" He turned toward the window, avoiding my gaze. "In your decisions, you were always the one who had control." For an instant, I saw him as when he was a child, when he ran to hug me after a nightmare. But that child no longer existed. Only a man remained, manipulated by a woman who confused money with dignity. Pamela came in shortly after. She didn't even say hello. "I came to talk about business, not emotions," she said. "We have a proposal." "There's no proposal that interests me." "There will be," she smiled. "Because when you sign, we'll let you stay in your house until you die." I looked at her calmly. "I don't need your permission to die, Mom, but you should worry about how you're going to live." Her face changed. "Don't threaten me." "I'm not," I countered. "I'm just reminding you that the castles of arrogance always crumble." They left together, and when the door closed, I felt that the sound of the doorknob was the same one you hear when blood separates from blood. The days grew long, full of letters from the lawyer, cold calls and rumors. The neighbors started talking. "Poor Inés," they'd say. "Her son sued her." I avoided going out, not out of shame, but because I didn't want anyone to see how my soul was falling apart. One afternoon, as I was watering the plants, the mailman handed me an envelope without a return address. Inside, there was a photograph. Robert and Pamela posing in front of Jonathan's company, with a sign that read, "New Management." Behind it, a phrase written in red ink: "The past ends when one signs their defeat." That photo was the breaking point. I stopped crying. I stopped waiting. And I started planning. I took the MAB 17 key from the drawer. I knew I had to open Jonathan's file, even though my hands were trembling. I went to his old office, where it still smelled of wood, ink, and memories. The drawer was sealed with an old padlock. The key fit with a click. Inside was a brown envelope, a notebook, and a letter addressed to me. The letter said, "Inés, if you are reading this, it's because ambition has knocked on our door. Inside this envelope you will find documents that only you can use. Don't show them until shame has a name and last name. Trust the advice I always gave you. Don't fight with your hands. Fight with the truth." Inside the envelope were copies of the original will and a deed in the name of an unknown company. the Southern Dawn Foundation. The legal representative was someone unfamiliar to me, Richard Godoy. I searched through the papers, and at the end of the notebook, a note. Dawn is the light that will protect you when darkness surrounds you. I didn't entirely understand, but something told me that Jonathan had left more than money. He had left a strategy. Days passed. Pamela and Robert insisted on meetings and lawyers. I attended in silence, listening to their lies, signing papers that were worthless. They believed I was yielding, but what I was doing was waiting for the exact moment. One night, while preparing tea, I remembered the judge's words at the first hearing. This case will be subject to review if any irregularity in the will is proven. And then I knew, the reserved clause. Jonathan had left it for a reason. It was a hidden piece that could only be revealed if a judicial process was initiated against me. And that process had already begun. The next day, I went to the notary with the letter and the documents from the Southern Dawn Foundation. I asked him to analyze them. He spent hours reading, comparing signatures, reviewing seals. Finally, he looked up with a mixture of astonishment and respect. "Mrs. Jenkins, this changes everything." "What does it mean?" "That your husband didn't just leave you the assets. He left you control of the company through this foundation. And what happens to my son and his wife? Legally, they work for you." I was speechless. It was a masterstroke. Jonathan had foreseen the betrayal. And now, the weapon of my defense wasn't resentment, it was the law itself. I left the office with my heart beating strongly. The sun blinded me, but everything inside me was clear. For the first time in months, I didn't feel fear. That night I slept in peace, knowing that blood can betray, but the truth never does. When I looked in the mirror at dawn, I saw another woman. I was no longer the humiliated mother. I was the heiress of her own destiny. And I swore, with a low but firm voice, that before the world stopped turning, Pamela would learn what it means to slap a judge of destiny. Since I discovered the true purpose of the Southern Dawn Foundation, I knew that destiny had returned a card to me that many believed was burned. It was not an act of luck, but of love and strategy. Jonathan, my husband, had been a meticulous businessman. He knew people better than they knew themselves, and he had foreseen what Pamela represented. Ambition disguised as affection. That's why he created the foundation, a legal framework that at first glance looked like a charitable organization, but which, in reality, was the secret piece of our estate. Through it, all company shares and assets remained under my control, but without my name being visible. I was the invisible owner of everything, and Pamela, who thought she was so clever, was working, unknowingly, for the woman she had humiliated. That revelation changed me, not on the surface, but in the way I breathed, walked, and looked. Rage ceased to be a volcano and turned into ice, cold, sharp, silent. I learned that revenge doesn't need screams, only time and patience. For weeks I feigned weakness. I responded to Robert's messages with feigned tenderness. "Of course, son. If you think I should sign, I will." "Certainly, Pamela. I trust your judgment." I said on calls that I recorded without their noticing. Every word they uttered was one more piece of the trap. One afternoon I went to the company headquarters. The employees greeted me with respect, but also with discomfort. Pamela was there, sitting in the chair that once belonged to my husband. When she saw me, she raised an eyebrow. "To what do we owe your visit, Mrs. Jenkins?" she asked, with that false smile that looked carved. "To my desire to see how you are managing Jonathan's legacy," I replied calmly. "I am his wife, after all." Of course, she said, while playing with a gold pen. Although soon all of this will formally belong to Robert and me. Oh, really? I asked. And have you already reviewed the deeds of the Southern Dawn Foundation? She froze for a second. What foundation? Oh, nothing, I replied. A detail that perhaps your lawyer should check before continuing to sign contracts. I smiled at her. That smile was my first move on the chessboard. That same week I visited Richard Godoy, the legal representative listed in the documents, an older man with a firm voice and a transparent gaze. Your husband told me about you, Mrs. Jenkins, he said, shaking my hand. He asked me to wait for the day you would come. And what else did he tell you? I asked. That I shouldn't trust anyone who talks too much. I explained everything that was happening. Richard reviewed the papers, nodding in silence. We can move the pieces without alerting them, he finally said. We will discreetly transfer the administrative direction of the company to the foundation. When they want to sell, lease, or manipulate assets, they will need your signature. And when they discover they can't do it, I replied, smiling, it will already be too late. In the following weeks, I began to receive reports from the company without Pamela or Robert knowing. The internal accountant, a young woman named Laura, had been my protégé years ago. She kept me informed of everything. False contracts, unjustified expenses, hidden bank accounts. Every piece of data was a bullet of truth that I carefully stored. And while they thought they were weakening me, I was strengthening myself in silence. I remember the day Pamela called me, furious. What did you do, you old woman? She screamed over the phone. The bank rejected our transaction. What transaction? I asked in an innocent voice. The sale of your husband's shares. They said they are frozen under something called Southern Dawn. Oh, yes, I answered slowly. Dawn. What a beautiful name, isn't it? She hung up without saying more. I kept looking at the phone with a calm I hadn't known. Finally, the board was starting to turn in my favor. However, not everything in me was pride. Every time I saw Robert, I felt my heart break a little more. His gaze avoided mine. There was no longer tenderness, nor remorse, not even conflict. It was as if Pamela had emptied his soul. One night I asked him directly, "Why, son? Why do you allow her to humiliate me like this?" "Because I can't stand to see how you are ruining everything Dad built," he replied coldly. "And if I have to choose between my wife and you, I choose her." His words were a dagger. I didn't cry. But that night, as I put the documents away in a safe, I spoke softly to Jonathan. You wanted me to use the truth, my love. Well, the truth will be my revenge. A month later, Pamela and Robert called a board meeting. They wanted to approve the company's new structure, eliminate my symbolic participation, and sign contracts with foreign investors. What they didn't know was that legally, no decision could be made without my authorization. I entered the room with a firm step, without prior notice. Pamela stood up, indignant. "What are you doing here?" "Attending the meeting as president of the Southern Dawn Foundation," I replied. "What?" she stammered. "That's right. Everything you are about to sign depends on my approval." The faces at the table transformed. Some lowered their gaze, others sat up straight. And then I said what I had been waiting months to pronounce. For years you believed you could manipulate the story. But this company does not belong to those who inherit. It belongs to those who sustain it. Pamela tried to object. "This is illegal." "No," I said, looking at the lawyer present. "It is justice." The meeting ended in silence. I left without looking back, feeling the weight of a promise fulfilled. It wasn't the end. It was only the prelude to the fall. That night, as I was drinking tea by the window, I saw my reflection in the glass. For a second, I thought I saw Jonathan smiling behind me. "You did it," he seemed to say. And I replied in a low voice, "Not yet. I still need to see their faces when they realize who signs the final sentence." The dawn of that Monday had a strange, almost solemn air. It was the kind of morning where the sky seems to watch you, as if destiny were waiting to see what you are made of. I dressed slowly, in a pearl grey suit and a gold brooch that had belonged to my mother. Every movement was a silent declaration of war. The day of the trial had arrived. Pamela had requested it urgently, asserting that my mental health put the stability of the family business at risk. The courtroom was packed: lawyers, employees, curious onlookers, and journalists who smelled the drama from miles away. As I walked down the central aisle, I felt the stares piercing my back. But I did not lower my head. I learned that the weak look at the floor, the wise look straight ahead. When I reached the table, Pamela was already there, dressed in white, with a theatrical air. She held my son's hand as if it were a trophy. Seeing me, she smiled with that poisonous gesture I knew too well. "Look who deigns to show up," she murmured. "The poor, confused old lady." The judge called for order, but she didn't need it. She knew how to hurt me without raising her voice. Robert, on the other hand, said nothing. He only avoided looking at me, just like at that first hearing. I sat down in silence. The opposing counsel began to present. His words were poison disguised as compassion. "Mrs. Jenkins is going through a condition of progressive cognitive decline. We have medical reports that confirm it." I smiled serenely. That medical report had been written by a doctor friend of Pamela's, a man who had never examined me. I knew his castle of lies was about to crumble. The session continued with witness statements. Some employees, visibly uncomfortable, repeated phrases they didn't believe. Sometimes she forgets things. She struggles to understand financial documents. And then Pamela took the floor. Her voice rose like a siren of arrogance. "Your Honor," she said, "this woman has lost her mind. She cannot continue to lead a company that she doesn't even understand. I, as her son's wife, have tried to help her, but she refuses. She is stubborn, aggressive, and dangerous." Her words resonated in the room. Then she looked directly at me, with that viper's smile she so enjoyed. "Moreover," she added, "there have been violent episodes. She recently tried to attack me." Some attendees murmured. I watched her in silence. "Do you have evidence of that, ma'am?" the judge asked. "No," she replied, "but everyone here knows how she is." Everyone fell silent. The silence weighed so heavily that the judge sighed and said, "Mrs. Jenkins, you may speak if you wish." I stood up. "Thank you, Your Honor," I said calmly. "I will speak, but not to defend myself, but to remind you of something that seems to have been forgotten. The truth doesn't need noise." I took a few steps toward the stand. I felt the stares, the murmurs, and then, without raising my voice, I said, "For months I have been insulted, manipulated, and ridiculed, not by strangers, but by my own family." I looked at Robert. "By you, son." He lowered his head. Then I looked at Pamela. "Do you think you have won? That money buys respect and that lies prevail with confidence? But there is something money cannot buy: the memory of the dead." I saw her tense up. My husband, Jonathan Jenkins, knew what was coming, and he prepared his words for this day. The room shook. I took a sealed envelope from my purse. This document was delivered by the Supreme Judicial Council, according to the reserved clause of my husband's will. The judge took it, checked the seal, and nodded. "Proceed." The court lawyer read aloud. If at any time my wife's moral or mental capacity is called into question, this document must be opened in the presence of the judge. I declare that all my assets, shares, and properties are under the protection of the Southern Dawn Foundation, whose total power rests with my wife, Mrs. Inez Jenkins, and her decisions shall be unquestionable by law. Any attempt to challenge this will be considered fraud and breach of trust. The murmurs turned into a roar. Pamela turned pale. Robert put a hand to his forehead. I remained standing, not moving a muscle. The judge looked up. Are you saying, Mrs. Jenkins, that you are the sole legal authority of the company and the family estate? That's right, I replied. For years. Pamela jumped up. That's impossible. This is a farce, she screamed. She can't have that much power. The judge struck the gavel. Silence in the court. But she wouldn't be quiet. This woman is crazy. She has manipulated us all. I looked her in the eyes. No, Pamela. He who plays with fire gets burned. He who plays with justice ends up facing it. And I took a step back. The judge nodded to an assistant, who handed over another document. It was the official confirmation of the registration of the Southern Dawn Foundation, with my name as the legal representative. Pamela backed away, trembling. Robert couldn't even look at me. He was the perfect portrait of guilt. At that moment, the judge declared a recess. I headed for the hall, with the camera flashes behind me. Pamela came running beside herself. You planned the whole thing, you damned old woman, she shouted and pushed me violently. The guard intervened and stopped her. I looked at her calmly. You know what the worst part is, Pamela, I said to her. That while you thought you were taking away my life, I was letting you dig your own grave. She looked at me with hatred. This doesn't end here. Oh, of course not, I replied. It's just beginning. Before we continue, tell me in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would do in my place. Don't leave the video because what comes next will give you goosebumps. We returned to the room. The judge took his seat. His voice resonated gravely, solemnly. By unanimous decision, the lawsuit against Mrs. Inez Jenkins is dismissed. Furthermore, an investigation for attempted family fraud will be initiated against Ms. Pamela Smith and Mr. Robert Jenkins. The strike of the gavel sealed the end. Pamela screamed. Robert buried his face in his hands. I simply sat down, the same seat where I had been humiliated before. And from there, I watched as justice became visible, even if it hurt like an old scar. I looked up at the ceiling, as if I could see Jonathan smiling up there. I did it, my love, I whispered. I did it. The echo of the gavel was still ringing in my head when I left the courthouse. The cameras followed me. The microphones stretched toward me. The lights blinded me. I, who had arrived there as a humiliated old woman, left transformed into a symbol of justice. But inside me there was no joy, only a heavy silence, the silence left by a battle won with a wounded heart. Pamela was escorted away by the guards. Her gaze was a cocktail of fury and fear. Robert, on the other hand, seemed absent, as if his whole world had collapsed and he didn't know how to rebuild it. I looked at him for a few seconds. In his face, I didn't see malice, but something worse. Shame. That shame that cannot be washed away with tears and excuses. Days later, the investigations began. The court ordered a review of the family company's financial movements. I knew there were irregularities, but I never imagined the magnitude of the disaster. The preliminary report was devastating. Pamela had been diverting funds for years, forging my signature on internal documents. She had bought properties in her mother's name, expensive jewelry, and luxury vehicles with company money. But the worst part was discovering that Robert knew. The emails gave him away. You sign it. She never checks anything. My mother will never understand these papers. Do it before Southern Dawn activates. Southern Dawn, the name of the foundation that they thought was a ghost, now haunted them like a living curse. The prosecutor called me to testify. Mrs. Jenkins, he told me, your daughter-in-law and your son are implicated in million-dollar fraud. Do you wish to press charges? I looked at him calmly. I don't desire revenge, I replied. I desire truth. And the truth, once revealed, began to consume them. Pamela lost control. She tried to blame Robert, then the lawyers, then me. Her arrogance turned into desperation. Meanwhile, my son disappeared for several days. I later learned that he had taken refuge in the old summer house, the same one where he learned to walk. One night I looked for him, not to punish him, but to understand. The house smelled of dust and memories. Robert was sitting on the floor, the trial papers scattered around him. He looked at me with swollen eyes. How could you? I asked softly. I don't know when I lost it, Mum, he murmured. It all started as something small. Pamela said it was temporary, that we would fix everything later. And you thought it was fair to steal from your dead father? It wasn't for the money, he said, crying. It was for her. I didn't want to lose her. I looked at him for a long time, compassion mixed with pain. Son, I told him, you lost something much more valuable, my respect. He covered his face with his hands. I wanted to touch him, but my body wouldn't move. Sometimes love hurts so much that one paralyzes oneself so as not to feel it. The next morning, the press did its job. The Jenkins Company, family fraud uncovered. The headlines filled the news. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Some sought statements, others interviews. I didn't answer any. The real noise had already happened, and now I needed silence. However, something strange happened that afternoon. The court lawyer called me. Mrs. Jenkins, reviewing the documents of the Southern Dawn Foundation, we found something you need to see. I went immediately. On his desk was a different folder, with a handwritten note. The handwriting was Jonathan's. It said, "If you read this, it's because time has done its work." Inside Southern Dawn, there is a second, smaller foundation, registered in the name of our son Robert. Don't touch it until he understands his mistake. When he does, it will be his opportunity for redemption. I felt a knot in my throat. Jonathan, even after death, continued to believe in the hidden goodness of his son, and I still didn't know if I had the courage to do it. Days passed. Pamela was summoned again, and her defense collapsed. Her own lawyer presented evidence that incriminated her. The entire society watched her fall. She, who once called me the disgrace of the family, became the public disgrace of everyone. But Robert did not return to the courtroom. He did not show up for the hearings or the meetings. His absence was his conviction. One morning I received a letter. The envelope had no return address, but I recognized his handwriting. It said, "Mum, I know what I did. Don't seek to forgive me. Just let me start over. If you ever want to, open the blue envelope Dad left in his desk. I love you, even if I no longer deserve it." I went to Jonathan's study. The blue envelope was there, intact. Inside, a single phrase written in his handwriting. "Love is not inherited, it is earned." I cried as I hadn't cried since his death, because I understood that Jonathan had planned not only justice, but also redemption. That night I lit a candle in front of his portrait. I spoke to him softly. "Your son has fallen, but he is still breathing. Perhaps, as you said, love is the only inheritance worth rescuing. I closed my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel hatred, only tiredness and a strange serenity, as if my soul had let go of something heavy. The truth had come to light, and although it cost me everything, its brightness illuminated even the deepest shadows of my heart. They say the biggest fall is not of the body, but of the soul, and I saw it with my own eyes. I saw how arrogance melts when it confronts the truth, how the voice that once screamed, "Disgusting old woman," now only trembled, begging for compassion. Pamela Smith, the woman who once slapped me in public, was in front of me, defeated. The court had delivered its final verdict, guilty of fraud, falsification of documents, and breach of trust. 5 years of supervised probation. Her face, made up until the last day, melted in tears that no longer served as a shield. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. "You won, Mrs. Jenkins," she stammered. "But remember, sons always end up hating the mothers who destroy their wives." She looked at me with a mixture of hatred and fear, and in that instant I understood that I hadn't won anything. I had only survived. Robert was sitting at the back of the room. He didn't speak. He didn't move. His eyes, red and swollen, seemed to look for a sign of forgiveness in me that I couldn't yet give him. When the hearing ended, he got up and left without a word. I stayed there, alone, with the subdued applause of the press, with the noise of the cameras and the whispers of the people who pointed to me as the woman who beat her family. But there was no glory in me, only an old weariness, the weight of having won a war I never wanted to fight. I left the courthouse, taking a deep breath. The street air smelled of rain and freedom. I stopped on the steps and looked up at the sky. "Jonathan," I whispered, "everything collapsed as you said, but at what price?" The following weeks were an avalanche. The press wouldn't stop talking about the case. The trial that shook the city. The mother who regained justice. I did not respond to interviews or accept tributes. There was too much sadness in my victory. Pamela was transferred to the women's facility. Her family disappeared from public life. And Robert lost everything. The company, his friends, his respect. Employees avoided him. Banks called without an answer, and people pointed at him on the street. The man who once thought he was powerful now wandered through the ruins of his own pride. One night, I saw him from the window. He was in front of my house, standing in the rain. He didn't call. He didn't speak. He just watched. I don't know how long he was there. When I went out, he was already gone. Only a letter remained on the gate. "I'm not looking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that I finally understand." Days passed, and I started to notice something curious. For the first time in years, I could sleep peacefully. The house, once full of shadows and guilt, seemed to breathe again. I watered the plants, opened the windows, and at night the old grandfather clock chimed again. That sound reminded me that time, although cruel, also heals. However, the calm didn't last long. One morning, I received a call from the company lawyer. "Mrs. Jenkins," he told me, "the press is about to publish something important. They discovered the full clause of the Southern Dawn Foundation." "What about it?" "There is a final provision written by your husband and one more name." I went to his office immediately. On the desk, a sealed document awaited me. The lawyer carefully opened it and read. "In the event that the Foundation successfully re-establishes justice and protects the integrity of the family estate, 30% of the assets shall be transferred to Mr. Robert Jenkins, provided that this is approved by his mother, Mrs. Inez Jenkins." I closed my eyes. "Jonathan, even from the grave, was still teaching me lessons. He had left the key to forgiveness in my hands. That night I didn't sleep. I walked around the house until dawn, debating between my heart and my pride. Did my son deserve a second chance? Could I trust someone who had betrayed me so deeply again? I remembered his words the day I confronted him at the summer house. It wasn't for the money, Mum. It was for her. Perhaps wrong love can turn men into monsters, but repentance can also turn them back into humans. At dawn, I wrote a letter. Robert, your father left you one last chance. Not to go back to who you were, but to demonstrate that you learned. Forgiveness is not asked for, it is built. If you want to redeem yourself, come see me. But don't come with excuses. Come with the truth. I left it in the hands of the lawyer with the order to deliver it if Robert appeared. 3 days passed without news. Until one afternoon, returning from the farmer's market, I saw him. He was sitting on the steps of my house, thin, with dark circles under his eyes, aged. When he saw me, he awkwardly stood up. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke. I didn't know whether to hug him or push him away. He took one more step and fell to his knees. "I have nothing, Mom. No house, no friends. But I want to be your son again." The silence that followed was so deep that I could hear my heart. I looked at him for a long time, and finally replied. The son I lost died the day he watched in silence while I was humiliated. But if the man in front of me comes to rebuild what he destroyed, perhaps he can be reborn. I helped him up, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that my love for him was no longer a wound, but a scar that I could touch without pain. That night, I lit 2 candles in front of Jonathan's portrait. "Everything collapsed, my love," I told him. "But from the ruins, truth is born." I kept looking at the flame until it began to tremble, and I swore that before I died, I would do one last thing, honor Jonathan's legacy and give Robert the final lesson he had planned. Because forgiveness, when it arrives, is not oblivion. It is justice wrapped in mercy, and I was ready to apply it. When the noise of the scandal died down, what remained was silence. A thick, dense silence that enveloped me every morning when I opened my eyes and found myself alone. For weeks I wondered if I had really gained anything. Yes, there was justice, there was legal peace, but inside me a sadness still pulsed that I didn't entirely understand. I had recovered the company, respect, my name, but along the way I had lost something greater, the innocence of believing that family love is unbreakable. Now I knew. Love also breaks, and when it does, it sounds like glass that no one can mend. The whole town spoke of me, some with admiration, others with envy, and many with compassion. "Poor Mrs. Jenkins," they would say in a low voice, having to fight her own son. But none of them knew what it meant to return home, take off your shoes, and feel the walls echo your own voice. One afternoon, as I was watering the plants, a neighbor greeted me from the sidewalk. "Inés, you are a strong woman," she called out. "What courage you have. I wish I had half of it." I smiled at her. If she only knew that strength is not bravery, but resignation. You don't become strong because you want to. You become strong because there is no other option. Robert came sometimes. He would arrive unannounced, with a tired look, with a bouquet of wilted flowers in his hand. We would sit in silence, face to face, without reproaches. One day he told me, "Mum, people look at me differently now. It's the look of contempt, son. When you look down on others, you end up falling to the ground." He lowered his gaze. "Will I ever be able to regain your trust?" "Trust is not regained," I replied. It is rebuilt, and that takes time. I hugged him. His body trembled as it did when he was a child and had a fever. And then I knew the son I lost to greed was slowly returning from the ashes. One morning I received a package in the mail. It had no return address, just a gold ribbon and a note. For when justice doesn't keep you awake, but gives you back your sleep. It was Jonathan's handwriting. Inside was a wooden box and a letter. I opened it with trembling hands. The letter said, "Ines, if you are reading this, it's because you fulfilled your part." I knew that greed would come to our door disguised as family, and that you would be the only one capable of facing it. But this story was not about revenge, but about redemption. Don't seek to destroy the guilty. Give them the opportunity to save themselves. Inside this box is the final fragment of our truth. I opened the box. There was a gold pendant with a tiny inscription, R.J. They were Robert Jenkins's initials. Below it, a small envelope with documents. They were the papers for a bank account in the name of the Southern Dawn Foundation, Project Hope, and a final note, written in Jonathan's firm handwriting. This money is not for punishment, but for teaching. Have Robert use it for something that gives meaning to his guilt. If he manages to do so, he will have closed the cycle. I sat for hours, looking at that pendant. It was as if Jonathan was speaking to me from somewhere between justice and forgiveness. I understood then that revenge had fulfilled its purpose. But now something more difficult was beginning. Reparation. That night, I invited Robert to dinner. I set the table as I hadn't done in years. White tablecloth, clean glasses, the chicken pot pie recipe he loved as a child. When he arrived, he seemed confused. "What is this?" he asked. "A dinner. An opportunity." I gave him the envelope and the pendant. "Your father left this for you," I told him. "But it's not money he's giving you. It's responsibility." "What do you want me to do with this?" "Use what's left to help. Not me, nor you. Others." "Who?" "Those who, like you, made a mistake looking for love in the wrong place." His eyes moistened. "And if I fail again?" "Then try again," I replied. "Error doesn't define you, son. What you do afterward does." We were silent for a long time. The wind blew through the trees, and for an instant I felt something familiar, the peace that comes when there is nothing left to prove. Robert stood up, took a step toward me and hugged me. It was not a lukewarm or distant hug. It was a hug that held all the lost years, all the words we never said. He cried on my shoulder, and I did too. Not because the past hurt, but because it finally stopped hurting. "I forgive you," he whispered. "Me too, son." That night, when he left, I sat on the front porch. The sky was clear, and a warm breeze caressed my face. A faint perfume of honeysuckle floated in the air, the same one Jonathan loved. I looked at the stars and, without meaning to, smiled. Because I understood that he had been present the entire time, not from heaven, but in every decision I made, in every word I didn't say, in every tear that turned into strength. I spoke to the wind with a serene voice. "It's done, Jonathan. You did it." And I swore I heard him. His voice, like a whisper in the air, answered me. "No, Ines, you did it." Days later, Robert officially opened Project Hope. It was a scholarship program for young people in vulnerable situations, financed with the funds that were once the fruit of deception. The curious press came looking for me again. Why give another chance to the one who betrayed you? My answer was simple. Because no one learns if they aren't allowed to try again. From that day on, I was no longer the betrayed mother, nor the woman who won the lawsuit. I was simply Ines Jenkins, a woman who survived hatred and chose forgiveness. A year later, the anniversary of Jonathan's death coincided with the official inauguration of the foundation. The ceremony was simple, but beautiful. There were white flowers, soft music, and a mural in his honor. Robert gave a brief speech and at the end asked me to join him at the stand. I didn't want to speak, but I did. "I am not a perfect woman," I said. "I have been hurt, I have failed, and I have also held grudges. But I learned that resentment ages the soul, and that justice without love doesn't heal, it only punishes. Today I understand that forgiving is not giving up. It is reclaiming the peace that hatred steals from us." The audience applauded, but I only looked at Jonathan's portrait on the wall. And for the first time, I didn't cry. I smiled. That night, at home, I lit the last candle in front of his photo. The flame moved softly, as if breathing, and I said softly, "I kept your promise, Jonathan. Our family has a name again." I poured myself a glass of wine, opened the window, and let the night air in. Outside, the moon bathed the garden with a golden light. Everything was calm. Justice had done its job. Vengeance had dissolved into forgiveness, and love had survived everything. I closed my eyes, and in that luminous silence, I understood that this was my true victory. Dear listener, if you made it this far, thank you for staying with me. My story is not just about betrayal and justice, but about love, dignity, and redemption. I learned that the most difficult trials are not won in courtrooms, but in the heart, and that when a mother forgives, the whole world finds a little peace. I am Ines Jenkins, and this was my story. Before you go, I want to extend a very special invitation. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like if this story touched your heart, and tell me in the comments which city you are watching us from. Your support keeps these stories alive, reminding us that justice without compassion doesn't change the world, but love does. Postscript, the final secret. The morning after that dinner, as the sun timidly entered through the window, I found something I had overlooked. The wooden box where the pendant came had a false bottom. I noticed it by accident, while cleaning it. I knocked gently with my knuckles and heard a hollow sound. I slid a needle into the slot and the bottom lifted. Inside, carefully folded, there was one more letter. The yellowish paper, the blue ink, the handwriting, unmistakable. Jonathan's. For a moment I hesitated to open it. I had read many letters from him, but something in my chest warned me that this one wouldn't be like the others. And I was right. I opened it slowly. The first paragraph sent a chill down my spine. "Ines, if you read this, it's because destiny has completed its cycle. I'm not writing to ask you for anything, but to tell you a truth that I hid while I lived. I did it out of love, and perhaps out of fear. Not only did I leave a foundation, I also left a story that belongs to you." I sat down. My heart was beating so hard that I felt the paper tremble in my hands. I continued reading. "Many years ago, when Robert was still a child, I made a mistake. I trusted the wrong partner. His name was Richard Godoy. Yes, the same lawyer who is now helping you. He saved me from ruin, but in return he demanded something that I couldn't deny him at the time. That if I died before you turned 65, part of the company's power would pass into his hands for a limited time. In exchange, he would be in charge of protecting you. But what I didn't tell you is that Godoy was not a stranger." I swallowed. My eyes raced over the lines, unwilling to accept what I was reading. Godoy was the brother I never introduced you to. I searched for him for years, but you and I already had too many wounds to add another. He knew that Pamela and Robert might try to betray you, and he promised me he would watch over you. He was the one who suggested I create the Southern Dawn Foundation. That's why I trusted him so much. I felt dizzy. Richard Godoy, the lawyer who had helped me in silence, was the brother-in-law I never knew. Jonathan's brother. Everything made sense. His respect, his prudence, his serene gaze when he spoke to me about justice. I continued reading, my hands damp with tears. I didn't tell you this because I knew you wouldn't understand it at the time. Your character, your pride, your sense of justice would have made you distrustful. But everything we did was to give you the opportunity for something greater than revenge, freedom. Not economic freedom, but emotional. I wanted that. In the end, you would not be anyone's victim, not even your own pain. The tears were no longer of sadness. They were of comprehension. Because in every word, I felt Jonathan's voice guiding me once more. When Pamela humiliates you, and I knew she would, I didn't want to see you react with anger, but with dignity, because your dignity would be the perfect trap for her arrogance. The judge you went to was also chosen by Godoy. Nothing was accidental. Everything was a chain designed to reveal what was hidden. I rested the letter on my lap. The entire legal framework, the will, the clause, the foundation, none of it had been improvised. Jonathan had foreseen everything, and deep down, I had only executed the final act of a play he wrote with love and strategy. I know it hurts what Robert did, but don't hate him. He wasn't born corrupt. He was molded by the need for approval, by the fear of disappointing me. And even though he has failed me, he is still our son. His soul needs your forgiveness more than your punishment. That's why I leave the final decision to you. If you consider that he learned, give him the part of the foundation that bears his name. If not, close it. Close. But remember, Ines, that mothers are not made to punish. They are made to teach. The letter ended with a phrase that made me close my eyes. When contempt turns into compassion, you will know that justice has been served. And when you hear the wind call your name, it won't be the wind. It will be me. I stayed silent for a long time. The clock marked the hours and the world kept turning, but I couldn't move. Every word from Jonathan was a caress and a wound. I loved him my whole life, and even dead, he continued to teach me to love in the most difficult way, by forgiving. I put the letter against my chest, against my heart, and went out to the garden. The wind blew softly, moving the leaves of the orange trees he himself planted. I closed my eyes, and I heard him, clearly as if he were behind me. Ines. I smiled through my tears. I know now, Jonathan. I understand everything. That night I called Robert. Come over tomorrow, I told him. What for? He asked, fearful. To close a cycle. When I hung up, I looked at Jonathan's portrait and felt a deep peace. The war was over, but the choice was just beginning. Robert arrived early that morning. He didn't wear a suit or his usual expensive cologne. He wore a simple shirt, his eyes were red, and his hands were empty. And that, somehow, moved me more than any apology. Because there are silences that weigh more than speeches. We sat, face to face, in the garden. The same garden where Jonathan and I had planted the orange trees when Robert was 5 years old. The air smelled of damp earth, and the birds sang as if life insisted on reminding us that the world went on, with or without our dramas. I received your letter, he said softly. And I know you read Dad's. I nodded. Yes. And I also know he left you something. Will you give it to me? he asked, almost afraid. I don't know yet. That depends on you. Robert looked me in the eyes. For the first time in a long time, I didn't see arrogance or pain. I saw repentance and something deeper, the desire to be worthy again. Dad planned everything, he continued, even my fall. No, I replied. You built your fall, but his love left you a ladder to climb up again. He remained silent, looking at the branches swaying in the wind. You know, he said suddenly, during the trial I thought about yelling at you, blaming you, but when I saw you sitting in the judge's chair, I understood what you had really done. And what was that? I asked. Turning your pain into dignity. Those words disarmed me. For months I had expected an apology, and what I received was understanding. And I realized that was much more valuable. I handed him an envelope. Inside were the documents for the Southern Dawn Foundation, Project Hope. Your father left this for you, I told him. But it's not money he's giving you. It's responsibility. What do you want me to do with this? Use what remains to help. Not me, not you. Others. Who? Those who, like you, made a mistake looking for love in the wrong place. His eyes welled up. And if I fail again? Then try again, I replied. The mistake doesn't define you, son. What you do afterward does. We remained in silence for a long time. The wind blew through the trees, and for an instant I felt something familiar, the peace that comes when there is nothing left to prove. Robert stood up, took a step toward me and hugged me. It was not a lukewarm or distant embrace. It was a hug that carried all the lost years, all the words we never said. He cried on my shoulder, and I did too. Not because the past hurt, but because it finally stopped hurting. I forgive you, he whispered. Me too, son. That night, when he left, I sat on the porch. The sky was clear, and a warm breeze caressed my face. A faint perfume of orange blossom floated in the air, the same one Jonathan loved. I looked at the stars and, without meaning to, smiled, because I understood that he had been present the entire time, not from heaven, but in every decision I made, in every word I didn't say, in every tear that turned into strength. I spoke to the wind with a serene voice. It's all done, Jonathan. You did it. And I swore I heard him. His voice, like a whisper in the air, answered me. No, Ines, you did it.